It's not just giving away of modules, though. If you run into him on IRC or at a conference and say that something could possibly be done, he has a favorite phrase, well volunteered. Some people spoke up too much on IRC and ended up being conference organizers. And now, the other half, who may or may not be the responsible adult of Shadowcat, Matt Trout.
Come on, work it out. I love technology. Anyway, welcome to this year's State of the Velociraptor. Which, oddly, this is the fifth year I've been doing this now. I'm amazed that you've not all got sick of me yet. I certainly would have done. But it's also notable that something else coincided. What's much more amazing than that? I mean, you know, me getting up and talking rubbish at people for 50 minutes, well, you know, that I can do easily. But here's the thing, SotV 1, the first ever one, was the same year as the Perl 5.12 release, right? So I was going, isn't it amazing, after years of not having one, we have a new major release of Perl. How cool is this? They've kept doing it. It's really embarrassing. Every year I have to have a slide going, look, we did it again for another year. And this year, Perl 5.20. 5 years, 5 major releases. I mean, the fact that we're not even surprised by that is unbelievable. This lunacy was originally started by Jesse Venson, also known as Obra, who, for reasons known only to himself, is now currently running a keyboard startup. I'm sure it's very cool for people who aren't already completely addicted to ThinkPad keyboards like I have been for a decade. And then the baton was handed on to RJBS. And one of the reasons they've managed to keep doing this is that the monthly bleed releases pretty much all have a different release manager, which not only has the advantage of sharing the pain and irritation and the sheer paranoia of breaking everything, but means that basically, by the process of having repeated people who have no idea what they're doing, the release process has got so much tighter, so much more solid. Fundamentally because if you can break it, one of us probably did. Which leads me to making a shout out to RGS, who was the pumpkin for most of 5.10. Also has a fairly wicked sense of humor, which resulted in, when I did my bleed release years ago, his immediate comment, if people remember, I had white blonde hair for a year or so. So, of course, as soon as I ship a bleed release, RGS goes, hey, releasing Perl 5 is so easy a blonde can do it now. Although, I mean, honestly, I was swapped. I was meant to be doing the July release, ended up doing the June release. This meant I spent half of a Yapsy in the speakers lounge cursing. So, for reference, while I'd probably have screwed it up anyway, I am never ever doing a Perl release during Yapsy again. I do learn eventually. Anyway, RJBS is awesome. He's not only managed to keep cat herding people, but he manages to get all sorts of people on the Perl 5 Porters list on track just by out-nicing them until they give up being an asshole. This is a skill I massively respect on account of I don't get as far as nicing people in the first place. So please give the man a round. Meantime, the whole theme of this, one of the reasons for going for annual releases was to make steady progress. So we added package food blocks so that you can end up with better organized package declarations. S/R is it's a tiny thing, but actually being able to return the result of a substitution so you don't need a temporary variable, man, that makes scripting nicer. Being able to apply things like keys and values to references rather than having to deref them first, really neat feature. In the process of going, we might actually want to be able to change defaults, so we have use v5.xx not just requiring a particular Perl release, but also setting up a default set of features. So if you pick a high enough number, you actually get use strict by default. I mean, who doesn't want use strict? We've added support for lexical subroutines, and that, honestly, I've still not worked out a use for it, but I'm sure several other people will. I suspect it's just I've already got too many crackfield workarounds already. This year is the for those people who are scared of that underscore, we got signatures. If you want to play with them anyway, signatures.pm exists on CPAN, which works fine on older releases. And I would be interested to see somebody tweak that to support the full set of current things. Please, somebody volunteer yourself. It involves C code, I'm not going near it. Anybody who's ever worked with my C code will thank me for this. Anyway, we also added Postfix deref and key value slices. Those are both well worth having a look at. Okay, they're 520 only, but something I wanted to show you, right? This looks pretty like the sort of code that I'll write, which is using only 5.8 features, right? With all of the different changes we've got, you can simplify that to that. Notice using / equals to escape the clumsy define construct, and postfix deref with a hash slice, with a key value slice to produce something. Now, okay, it's a little bit more syntax to learn. But if we were scared of learning a little bit more syntax, we wouldn't be using Perl, right? I wanted to point out, if you look at the difference between those two, once you understand the syntax, that version is a lot simpler and a lot cleaner. So even though these are all tiny tweaks, they add up to more difference than you think. So, you know, this is awesome. Let's see what extra cool thing we get in 522, right? Anyway. The other thing that's really nice is being able to get the latest Perl isn't surprising anymore. You know, there's Perl Brew for building, you know, a metric arse load of different Perls to test on. You have PLM, which tries to provide the sort of environment management that RubyEnv does. And for those of you who want to remain minimalist, the guts of Perl Brew were extracted into a script called Perl Build, which just builds one Perl using all of the same cleverness. That's really handy. If you just want one production Perl, makes life a lot easier. And the thing I really love is people are used to doing this. I mean, okay, even back in 2001, I had no problem with the idea of going unpack a tarball, should configure, yada yada, whatever. But not having to remember that stuff is nice. Speaking as somebody who spends a lot of time on IRC help channels, not having to explain that stuff is amazing. And most importantly, not having to deal with system Perls, cough, Red Hat, cough. The future's bright, and the future is ignoring the damn distro Perl and building one that works. Thank you. Same thing, being able to get the right CPAN modules. It used to be a common thing on Freenode Hash Perl. Before we could solve somebody's problem, we'd first have to spend half an hour teaching them how to actually be able to get CPAN stuff in a way that didn't scare them, or didn't result in their sysadmin eviscerating them, or etc, etc. And you know, okay, we've had CPAN-M and local lib as a great combination for years. Carton is a beautiful way of building a completely versioned local lib, and while it's not been gaining big headline features, Miyagawa keeps adding useful small features that make it more and more capable of managing stuff for you. And you know, if you want maximum overkill, there's Pinto, which allows you to build pretty much your own local CPAN mirror. And for maximum overkill with added web scale, there's Pinto and Stratapan. So, you know, and more interestingly, the Debian Perl team have been doing sterling work. There's half a dozen guys who are regularly updating stuff now, which means that at least the testing repositories are keeping pace in CPAN with a way that means, honestly, provided they're on actual Debian rather than on Bongo, apt-get actually rocks again. Those of you using Ubuntu, that's nice for you. Unfortunately, Ubuntu's approach is they take a snapshot of Debian testing every 6 months and then don't update it. If anybody knows people inside Ubuntu who would like to do this less stupidly, I'd be happy to help them. But yeah, it's very much a question of pick your poison. You can actually get modern stuff on old systems or custom stuff on new systems, and we're used to this, and it all just works. Okay, modulo the fact that it's made of software, but still. And I mean, progress continues in other areas in interesting ways. If you look at web stuff, Catalyst is still actually adding features. Being able to add features to a 10-year-old framework without breaking backwards compatibility is an interesting exercise, let me tell you. But the team are doing a sterling job of it. HTTP method matching went into core. There's other bits and pieces. If you're already using Catalyst, check the changelog. If you're still scared of it as huge, that's fine. Spend another 2 or 3 years doing web development and you'll understand why all the features are there. Dancer 2, Sawyer has picked that up and run with it, which is fantastic because I really want to see that mature. Because Dancer 1 demonstrated that there's a huge gap there for fundamentally something that emphasizes whip aptitude. Easy to get started with, not too much cognitive overhead. Sadly, the architecture of Dancer 1 internally has a tendency to scare people, so anybody who ends up digging into the internals then gets upset. What we're trying to get to with Dancer 2 is a situation where you have the low cognitive overhead startup, but then internals that don't make baby Jesus cry. And they're well on track to get there. And in the meantime, Modulicious out running in a random direction. The stuff that they're doing is awesome. If you look at Convos, which was released by Marcus Ramberg, Batman, a couple of other people, a complete IRC client, web-based front end, Perl and Redis back end, all async. But if you're running on the bleeding edge, Modulicious is doing an amazing job, and it really does keep kicking ass. The only thing is, in order to make that progress, they have fixed deprecation cycles. So I have a tendency to run into the thing of it's slightly different ass each year. Still, amazingly cool stuff. And having spent a lot of time dealing with backwards compatibility, I absolutely respect picking the trade-off of let's have the shiny features and make people think before they upgrade. You know, these are all valid approaches and they're all worth having. I remember the dark days before Catalyst when Perl had half a dozen web frameworks, none of which you actually wanted to use. Now there's at least 3 that lots of people want to use, and half a dozen niche ones that are amenable. with API. A Mojo IO loop delay is well worth a look. It's not so far to my taste, but if you find that futures or promises don't work for you, lots of the people who've said that have got completely addicted to delays, so please have a look at it. Because, you know, it's perfectly allowed to have different programming styles. You know, if there was only one way to do it, we'd be Python. Actually, no, in Python there's two ways to do it now because there's two versions of the language and the community keep arguing. I mean, you know, we have two different Perls, but we've got over the arguing about it bit. Maybe when they've been doing it for as long as we have, they'll work it out too. But yeah, no, again, the theme is there's more than one good way to do it now. And over in OO land, Moose is gradually moving forwards, various bits of core refactoring and cleanup. Key things like switching over to using module runtime, basically because there were 73 different ways to do class loading, and there's been a gradual move to refactor everything to be a wrapper around one way that actually works for people. You know, it's nothing big bang, but given how many features Moose already has, adding that more would just result in features people couldn't find, honestly. I mean that as a compliment. Moo is about to go 2.0, and I'm going to digress a moment here. Because this is one of those how to get completely blindsided by users moments. Okay, so I originally wrote Moo to basically be a cut-down Moose I could use for tiny command line scripts and maybe for CGI scripts. I also noticed that people who were too noobish to not be scared of dependencies were more likely to use Moose, so it was designed to be sort of my first M-star. You know, this is your Duplo and you'll upgrade to the full Lego Technics later. And in light of, and then what happened is, people noticed that Moo gave you enough of Moose to write most things you wanted to put on CPAN without having the argument with potential users about whether Moose was acceptable. Do not go there, it is a silly argument. But, fair enough, this does simplify life. I was particularly proud when the Moo team we kind of got collectively annoyed because RJBS had written email sender, which was vastly superior to email send, and then lots of people were refusing to use it as standard because it used Moose. So we ported it to Moo and told them to shut up and use the sensible module. And as that's happened more and more, honestly, it came as a surprise. People just started doing it. And this is awesome, but it was unexpected. And meant the strictures defaults that I started off with, which were meant to be maximum safety for newbies, suddenly became not quite the right plan. And in fact started causing more confusion than they were saving. So Moo 2.0, use Moo is only going to export strict and warnings, but in order to maintain the maximum safety for newbies who don't know what settings they want, we're going to document use strictures, use Moo, in the hopes that most of the newbies will copy and paste. And then later, when they know enough to make their own decision, they can do that then. So I think that's a fairly good approach. Because it means we preserve least surprise when you're doing porting, but still try and avoid newbies blowing their own feet off. So yeah, I probably should have decided to do that at least a year ago, to which I could only say, I'm an idiot. Oh wait, the slides, never mind. But no, I've always said I'm not an OO system designer. You know, use Moo was basically the subset of Moose that I couldn't live without. Fortunately, Stephen is, which is why Moose is good and Moo stole all of it. And last I heard, he's redesigning P5 mop again, because he came to the conclusion that the last attempt also wasn't good enough. hopefully, to be entirely honest, a bunch of the things he's changed in this are things that 2 years ago I said, you're going to need to do this. I really wish he'd actually bothered to turn up so I told you so him in front of you, but I'll just have to do that next year maybe. So yeah, I mean, ask me next year. Or him if he bothers to turn up that time. Anyway, as a short digression, one of my personal themes for this year is a decade of dubious decisions. Mostly because it's been a little over 10 years since I first uploaded something to CPAN. And that happened the old-fashioned way, which is Sam Traeger was maintaining bindings for GNU Guile, and I had this insane idea involving using Guile to provide a top-level threading module that then used continuation capture to drive event-driven code in Perl. That actually worked quite well. Unfortunately, Guile.pm had a couple of bugs. So I went, here's a patch, can you release this? And got a reply back of, no, but you could if you signed up for a pause account. All right, huh? So, yeah, even I got onto CPAN because somebody said, well, volunteered to me. Whether or not that was a good idea on their part, I shall leave to others to judge. But it does, I think, surface an important lesson. And one that I remember on a regular basis when I find myself dealing with something, not because I think I'm competent to do it, but because nobody else seems to be. Which is that the things that matter in an open source, volunteer-based community often don't get done by the best person, because they're really busy, aren't necessarily done by the most knowledgeable person, because they know enough to realize just how horrible the task is going to be. But instead, basically, are done by whoever turns up. Damn it, Stephen. Anyway, so I wanted to talk a bit about conduct, culture, and community. Only fairly briefly, but irc.perl.org now has a statement of conduct. This does not preclude us talking about Metallica and hash Perl. We had to rephrase it about 27 times until it's successfully made very clear just what sorts of things we won't tolerate without smelling like it was an HR department document that could be used to boot anybody. Booting anybody is reserved for because the Opus felt like it, clearly. And no, we're not calling it a code of conduct. Because really, with a community with a sense of humour like ours, who the hell thought that acronym was a good idea? And also the problem is then people decide to appoint themselves as a code of conduct white knight and get incredibly upset when every time people acronym it, they leave the W out. Anyway, so the point here is that this is not an HR department document. This is a declaration of civilization, for a very Perl community variant of civilization at least. Getting to the point we could do that? Wow. It has been a long and interesting process. I don't even want to count how many extra enemies I made in the process of being one of the people doing that. And I really don't want to count the number that Perl made, who ended up doing a lot of the tracking down and ban hammering repeated evaders. He's now retired because the rage is strong in that one when people are being idiots, which was fundamentally what we needed to get to where we are, but isn't what we want going forward. I, on the other hand, can't really entirely retire from the thing because I have servers to admin. But even so, the days of the warrior are over. What I hope to see going forwards is the days of the responsible adult, or at least the people cunningly disguised as responsible adults. So, the new set of community opers who are going to be dealing with all of this rubbish are Gene Hack, Garo and Ether. And I say unto you, I am so glad it's going to be you rather than me going forwards. Seriously. If they knew what they were letting themselves in for, I'm not sure they'd have said yes, but it's too late now. Yes. Anyway, in the meantime, you're still going to deal with problem children. And if we're endeavouring the age of civilization, problem children are going to have to be dealt with other than with a banhammer. I mean, the banhammer will still be there, but we're supposed to at least pretend to try to deal with them nicely first. Which means we're going to have to fix smarter rather than just larting them. So there's 4 categories that tend to be a serious problem. And if anybody recognises these slides, that's because they're shamelessly stolen from the 2011 state of the Velociraptor. But that's because I think it's worth saying it again. Also, given the gradually increasing age of our community, I'm sure plenty of you have got sufficient Alzheimer's you don't remember this anymore.
Speak up, Sonny.
But no, people who first come across as arseholes. I mean, this is regularly a problem on IRC. But you know, the defining traits are loud, blunt, and obnoxious. If you need an example, but
Lehman is worse.
I'm restricting myself to people I consider human here. Seriously, Mark Lehman is like a clockwork doll that only ever says you're wrong and stupid, and I refuse to tell you why. Doesn't count. However, arseholes may not be evil. Certain exceptions taken as read. But I mean, you know, sometimes people are just being direct. Sometimes it's honestly that they care about code more than they do about people. I've run into coming across in that category for the simple reason of, fundamentally, I'm more interested in teaching somebody more Perl than I am in whether they particularly like me afterwards, which is a personal priority. And in my spare time, when I'm helping for free for fun, I claim I'm allowed to do that. You want politeness? That's reserved for paying customers and people I'm sleeping with. Or, you know, they may just be German. But seriously, the best of the arseholes I would count as anti-heroes. A good example of this might be certain of Tom Christiansen's epic rants. Where he might offend 10 people, but he also makes 20 really good points that need to be paid attention to. The anti-hero archetype is too focused on trying to improve the problem at hand to really think about people. I mean, too focused to notice that they're upsetting people because their point is the passion for the solution. Okay, they're usually opinionated, but opinionated is useful. If you don't have strong opinions in a debate, you never get anywhere. And that sort of person tends to end up loud and right. Loud and right is great. Loud and wrong is unfortunate. Many people claim that quiet and right is the best of all worlds, and I do agree in theory, but only if people are actually listening to the quiet person. There have been too many times where a nice person has said something 3 times and been ignored. I've said it in my usual incredibly tactful style, and they've listened the first time and actually ended up with better code as a result. So there's always a trade-off to be made here. More interesting, idiots. lost, confused, incoherent. You either want to scream at them, kick ban them, ignore them, or just go and get drunk until you don't remember they were there anymore. But it's not always as bad as it first looks. They might be new to programming. They might be new to technical English. Or they might just think a completely different way to you.
It might be a linguist.
I know, but we forgive Mark Keating for doing a literature degree, you know. But no, seriously, there was one occasion where somebody who'd been driving me nuts on the DBX Class IRC channel for about 18 months, somebody comes in. I have made 3 attempts to explain this to somebody. Now, it was me, so I know it wasn't that I wasn't being loud enough. And then the guy goes, "Don't worry, Matt, I'll take this." And I'm thinking, well, since I'm about to murder the new user, yeah, let's see what happens. And so the guy who's been driving me nuts says, I don't know what he said to them, seriously, it made as much sense to me as that. And 5 minutes later, the person I'd failed to help for 20 minutes comes back with exactly the code I'd wanted him to write. Whoa, that was cool. I still have no idea how he did it. But the point here is, if people seem to be idiots, don't knock it if it works. Instead, embrace them as a valuable part of your community, because number one, they will have so much more patience with other idiots. They help each other. They'll document for each other because they know what isn't obvious to them that's obvious to you. And you know, one day you might even understand them. I have had middling success on that one, but still, I hope. So the next one is the whiners. You know the sort of people. Picky and annoying and needy. Always going, why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? Why is this like this? Well, good. They're the canary in the code mine, right? That, you know, fundamentally, when the whiner falls over and plays dead in a big dramatic gesture, that means you have a problem that all of the adult-sized people haven't noticed yet. You know, your response to this should be to tweak the docs, tweak the code, try and simplify APIs, because the thing is, yes, they're complaining about tiny problems, but the thing is, they're complaining about tiny problems, whereas somebody who doesn't may not care about the first tiny problem, but by the time they hit the 10th, they're going to give up and use a different library. So it's worth paying attention, no matter how frustrating. Fundamentally, these people are a walking usability test suite, in the same way that somebody like me is a walking destruction test suite, for both libraries and social norms. Anyway, but seriously, if you get somebody who seems like that, challenge them to help, because if they're making the effort to complain about every little thing, that probably means they care about every little thing. Ask them how it should work, what would work better for them. They might not ever contribute patches, but they'll certainly give you ideas of how to sand off sharp edges, and it's well worth doing it as you try and make a library more mature. Get the ideas and use them, and just accept that, you know, the delivery might be slightly frustrating, but the key point of my theme here is everybody's delivery is frustrating for somebody. So you have to work in those terms. And lather, rinse, repeat until there's no more whining. And one of the things you'll find is somebody who has had all of their little issues addressed will then make a great filter for whether somebody else's complaint is a real issue or actually just a whine. And that takes the problem away from you. In the same sense as loving your first wave of idiots makes the second wave much less painful. Loving your first wave of whiners makes the second wave much less painful. It's great. You know, community is force multiplier in action once again. Though, you know, you do kind of end up covered in emo in the process. And, yeah. Anyway. Trolls. Okay. So, people tend to refer to a troll somebody who's provocative, somebody who's inflexible, mostly just somebody who's annoying. And the thing is, that doesn't always indicate troll. It may indicate a communication barrier, poor social skills, being very German. As Audrey Tang has taught us, real trolls can be hugged. Basically, if somebody is literally just trying to stir trouble up, you can often get a long way just by giving them reasonable answers. And basically the RJBS approach, drowning them in niceness. As you might imagine, I'm not that good at this, but I do try and recruit people who are. But equally, maybe they just disagree and aren't expressing it that well. Some of the people I've most enjoyed working with have almost been thrown out of various bits of the community for coming across as trolls, just because they communicated an odd way. But basically, I spent however long it took to get to the point where we could communicate in a way that didn't cause us to hate each other. And they turned out to have been well worth it. I mean, you get things like, you regularly get people who are transferring from another language, going, oh my God, the syntax, it burns! And the thing is, okay, if you're used to something to other languages, you know what? Yeah, it does seem ugly to begin with. But the thing is, once you're used to it, it's easy and regular to read, and you can get a lot done in not much typing. But the key thing here is, you can't get defensive about it. You have to accept that this person's current feeling about it is valid as a feeling, even if you expect them to not feel like that later. So you know, engage on the merits. Accept the objection, accept that it's bothering them at the moment, and help them to get past it. And sell the reasoning for why it's like that. You know, if you get somebody who first hits Globrev stuff and goes, what? But if you show them half a dozen more reference examples and how much you can get done with how little code, they'll often come round. So it's always worth trying. And the best part of this is, actual incorrigible trolls really hate it when you give them a reasonable counter-argument rather than getting angry. Which, honestly, sometimes I manage to do just because it's funnier than shouting at them would be. And the actual trolls will often leave of their own accord. And then, even if the troll didn't learn something, every other newbie in that channel or on that mailing list or in that space had a chance to learn something. Always remember, when you're giving help online, your audience is not just the person you're helping, but every single other person who reads that help now or in the future. So yeah, hug the trolls, teach the ones who aren't trolls, because, you know, logic actually works. So yeah, in summary, the thing that we all need to remember is, people suck. Seriously, people suck. But we're all people too. Even me. Honest. So yeah, welcome to the new age of Perl, and welcome to the new age of the Perl community. And congratulations, it's you. Thank you very much. And I think I'm going to get shouted at for running 40 minutes instead of 50, but I really did think that 200 slides would take me 50 minutes. Apparently not.
So we will now take a break, but since we are ahead of schedule, we're going to start at 10.